He's done incredible research, and he focuses on what's going on in the unconscious. How does it actually trip us up? How does it move differently than the conscious? And he's going to share that with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Professor Powell, thank you for your comments. You'll notice that Professor Powell, towards the end of his talk, had a triangle of transformative change. And on that side, to the right, or my right anyway, of that triangle, there was this term, implicit bias. And we hear that term a lot these days. How is it that implicit bias affects us? How is it that implicit bias affects our unconscious behavior? Things like police shootings, things like the way that we educate our students. What is it that we refer to by implicit bias? I don't want to assume that all of us know that term or what it means. So I thought I'd give just a little bit of a demonstration for the group. I'll need your participation, as you were so gracious in doing a little bit earlier. I need from you, and I have my own notes here, so I'm not checking my messages. I am looking at my notes. I need from you now, if I don't mind, think of things. I'm going to ask for 4 categories, and then I'm going to ask people to raise their hand. I'm going to ask for bugs. I'm going to ask for examples of flowers. I'm going to ask for things that are good in life and then things that are bad in life. So let's start with the things that are good in life. What are some examples of things that are good in life? Puppies. Thank you very much. Elizabeth, I see puppies and perfect. Let's just take that for the moment. They're actually in here that I'm in my own notes. Okay, now let's think of a few, and I know that different people have different, conceptions of what falls into good versus bad. But let's stick to the universals. What are some things that are bad? Genocide, war, earthquakes, death, taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now let's think about, I see Billy Curtis in the audience. Billy, how about a bug? Cockroaches. Okay, other creepy crawlies. Mosquitoes. Let's stick to mosquitoes, and let's stick to bugs, let's stick to cockroaches, flies, etc. Fireflies and ladybugs can fall a little bit in the middle, and that's just not for today. Okay, how about now flowers? Flowers. Carnation. Naila. Huh? Roses, carnations, chrysanthemums, lilies, etc., etc. Okay, so now, I can't do this with my phone in my hand, but I'll have to do. Okay, now, please raise your right hand. Shake the hand of the person next to you. All right, now. And now raise your left hand. Now raise your left hand. This is my left, okay. Okay, now this is your right and this is your left. So now, okay, put the hands on the table, please. Okay, and we're going to work with these 4 categories, and we're going to divide these categories into 2. For this moment, your right hand is going to represent those good things that we talked about, the puppies and the babies, right? As well as the flowers, the roses, the chrysanthemums, the carnations. On your left hand, we're going to have the bugs, the spiders, the cockroaches. I'm not going to mention ladybugs. I have a ladybug t-shirt, actually. The spiders, the cockroaches, as well as the war, the famine, the taxes, the death. Okay? So right hand, good and flowers. Left hand, bugs and bad. Okay? You'll hear me say a word, and you please, if you could tap the appropriate hand or wherever you are best able to do so. Okay. Are we ready? Sunshine, war, marigold, cockroach, beetle, worm, happy, peace. Okay, we understood the rhythm and the cadence of that. Prank, 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 prank. That is a measure that we can index of the association between the particular terms. In this particular case, between flower terms and things that are good. Now let's do another exercise. I'm simply going to switch 2 of the categories. Let's have flowers and bad terms over here on your right. So flowers and bad on the right, and bugs and good on the left. Okay? same list. Rose, death, belonging, puppies, marigold, carnation. You can hear it. You can feel it. And I got to tell you, it's not a practice effect. If I did the reverse, you would see much greater facility to the terms that are consistent, to the terms that are inconsistent. And of course, that's with flowers and bugs. But what happens when the names that are associated with the categories are now things like Rodolfo, are now things like Juana, like Maria, like Yusuf, as opposed to things like Brittany, as opposed to things like Ludwig, as opposed to things like Heather, for example. That's the implicit attitude test, and you can find it online, and there's a number of categories, usually associating social categories with things that are good, things that are bad. It's a measure of your association between a social category on the one hand, and then the strength of that category and its link to what is good, what is bad, babies and puppies, pestilence and war, et cetera, et cetera. We can measure this, and we love to do this as psychologists, really get an accurate measure of your level of implicit bias and your level of unconscious prejudice. We take these association tests and we feel, oh my gosh, I have been branded. We ask people to go through psychology experiments where we ask them to take this test, and it turns out that this implicit level of prejudice is associated with a deep region in your brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala, the more you have these implicit associations of prejudice, the more your amygdala lights up. What is the amygdala? The amygdala is two almond-shaped structures deep in your reptilian brain that index threat, that index negativity. But it's a narrative. It's a narrative about the understanding of our science, and that narrative is actually changing. It's a narrative that actually makes us very nervous, because all of a sudden, that science makes you jump into the narrative of, well, do I have this prejudice? Is my amygdala lighting up? I can't do anything about this reptilian brain of mine because it's so deep within myself. There's this notion of immutability around implicit bias. There's this notion that somehow we have captured in this test something more true about you than, for example, your egalitarian tendencies. Briefly, in my dissertation, I had pictures of white and black social targets. And people were evaluating how aggressive these targets were simply on the basis of the pictures. The pictures didn't differ other than on the racial cues. When people were paying full attention, they made no distinction in the rated aggression of these targets. But when I asked people to think about something else, to monitor another process, they became busy, under cognitive load, as we say, and then you showed this deep racial bias. And that's nice, except that people say, aha, when you're under cognitive load, that really reveals who you really are deep down inside. And that is a phrase that I want to repeat, who you really are deep down inside. It's kind of like going all the way down to the amygdala, who you really are deep down inside. Please raise your right hand again, if you don't mind, or consider your right hand. Take your thumb, put it inside towards the palm, and wrap your brain around. Wrap your hand around, and then go like this, and that's a picture of your brain. Okay? Okay. Prefrontal cortex, inside is the limbic system. This is what people refer to here, and this is the brainstem. This limbic system is what people think about as the reptilian brain, as you thought about these very much, very deeply ingrained evolutionary inherited structures that signal threat. It's almost like we see ourselves as, reptiles going, threat over there, so snake over there, and that is what lights up. So when our amygdala lights up, and it is really true, people, people come into the lab and people judge black faces versus white faces, Muslim faces versus American faces. people's amygdalas light up differently. So there's a narrative in our science about how the amygdala signals threat and danger, and that amygdala then signals something very deep about our differences. And yet the amygdala, we now know, serves a different function. The amygdala actually turns out to be a signal of what we need to pay attention to. So depending on the small changes that are actually part of the upper crust of the brain, the more recent crust, the amygdala lights up differently. So it turns out that while the brain does respond differently to people of different backgrounds, you can do small changes that actually change brain activation down at the level of the limbic system, of the amygdala. For example, if you bring people into the lab and you say, these folks are Oakland Warriors fans, and these folks are Pelicans fans, and please look at them, and now rate them in terms of, of likability, or just simply look at them, turns out that your amygdala will now differentiate between the Pelicans fans and the Warriors fans. In other words, there is no basis to the idea that somehow race, that somehow skin color is privileged in our reptilian brain. Rather, there's this funny way in which our top-down categories influence judgments from the bottom up. Things at the level of 100 milliseconds, things that we used to think were so automatic that they couldn't be anything but evolutionarily derived, are actually under our cognitive control. What does that mean? It means that we have to take our top-down processes seriously, so that when Professor Powell says, let's address our implicit biases, we're not talking about immutable evolutionary characteristics that we have to work really hard to overcome, but we will never really achieve. We will achieve, and it takes a lot of work. We will explore in this conference, I think, the reasons why these social categories are so ingrained in us. And it's not, it's not untrue that these are not deeply ingrained, that they're not difficult patterns to break. They're reinforced, as we learned, by our individual behavior, by our communities, by our social structures. But biologically determined, they are not. Thank you.
So now you have a chance to hear from Joanna Macy. And again, her bio is in your packet, but let me just say a few things about Joanna. As I said earlier, she influenced me years ago. I try to read everything she writes, but it's hard because she writes so much.